6:30. Call the meeting to order, and could you call the roll, please?
Yes. For my list. Chairperson Kraus.
Here.
Member Snoblin.
Here.
Member Russell.
Here.
Member Dewart.
Here.
Member Gotchall.
Here.
Member Douglas.
Here.
Member Treffs.
Here.
Got everybody. I'm still putting my list together.
And again, perfect attendance. Thank you. Agenda item 1C. I should introduce this for the video, by the way. This is the Lake Bluff Park District Special Committee meeting of the Land Use Citizens Task Force. It is March 22nd, 2022. We are halfway through our quest to understand all things wetland and all things stormwater. And with that, let's go to 1C, which is the discussion topics from last meeting. These are, I think, all on the golf course. Thank you again, Nikki, for pulling these together. Do we have any questions or potential changes?
Just to add for clarification that the debt service on the golf course being retired in 2026, that's not affected by any decisions related to the wetlands, if I'm understanding and remembering correctly.
That's correct, I think, and I think that's a good, just a parenthetical thought there. Any other? Hello, John, Mr. Ryan.
Hello.
We're going to some of our introductory materials. We'll be with you shortly. So any additions or changes to the key points other than what Julie pointed out? My guess is that if we have the kind of meeting I'm anticipating today, we might have a couple of pages worth of key points and definitions today. That's kind of the hope. Agenda item 1D, statement of visitors. It's the policy of the Park District to provide an opportunity for members of the public via Zoom or when we get back to being in person to address the task force on issues that are within our area of responsibility. I will be opening up for questions specific to topics on the agenda later, but if anyone has a subject that they would like to address, please raise your hand. No hands, Jeff?
No, sir.
Okay, hopefully we'll have some commentary after another agenda item. Agenda item number 2, the minutes of March 8, 2022. The minutes have been distributed in our packet. Are there any additions, corrections, or changes? George, I know you had a couple.
Yes, on page 7, packet number, the third paragraph down, I'm asking if those two sentences that constitute that paragraph that begins Member Russell, if they could be changed to read, Member Russell asked why the current 10-year capital expense projection for the golf course of $800,000 was so much lower than the $2.7 million 10-year capital projection developed by staff in 2018. And then the beginning of the next paragraph, it begins by saying Executive Director Beeler explained that 1.25 million was for the clubhouse, and that was part of the 2.7 million. But I thought that John had then offered a pretty clear explanation of why the 1.25 million was no longer necessary, and there was nothing here in the minutes to explain that. I don't know, John, if you had a recollection as to what you may have said, but I thought it might be important for everyone to understand why there was a big swing.
I think I didn't go into much of what was in that. In the 1.2, it's about a little under 1.25 million for the renovation for the golf or for the clubhouse. It was scaled back, so it was 250,000 that ended up being put into it. but so it's, the renovation is finished. They kind of did a lighter renovation, so it's gone from the 1.2 to 0 now. Currently, that's on the list because that work was done. The roof was replaced, the drywall, light fixtures, doors, flooring, plumbing fixtures, electrical work, a lot of stuff that, shouldn't need to be touched or maintained over the next 10 years. So that was what was in the 1.2 million for the renovation. I had listed some of the other things such as the cart path replacement and repair went from 363,000 to 100,000. The golf cart replacement was I think 186,000 on that original list, and that's 0 now because Golf Visions has that. So that's something that I've updated a list, and Chair Kraus and I, we're going to go over a little bit later this week and just kind of confirm some of this information, and then we're going to send that out to all the board members.
Okay, thanks. And then just one other comment on page 8 of the packets, the minutes, what would be the 5th paragraph down that begins with Mickey Collins said there was no building maintenance costs. I'm wondering if after the 2 sentences that are there, we could add 2 sentences that read as follows. Mickey Collins responded that if the numbers listed in the operations budget line item referenced by Director Beeler were included in the 10 years of costs for the clubhouse, then these numbers also seem very low.
I do recall that she made that comment, so I think that's a good add.
I thought that, Steve, then you had commented that we would ask staff to check that.
Yep.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Great.
I have a question on the first page of the minutes, and it's just in the sentence that begins also present. 2 people are mentioned as being committee members, and I don't know what committee that is. I wonder if we could clarify that. Is that a park district committee?
They are, yeah, they're from other park district committees. So we could clarify which committees they're on.
Well, it just, even for my purposes, just adding park district committee members, just so that it's clear that they are members of a committee of the park district.
Okay, that makes sense.
Any other changes, corrections? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of March 8th, 2022 as amended.
So moved.
We have a motion, and Al, did I see you second? A motion on the second. Any additional discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Chairperson Kraus,
Aye.
Member Dewart,
Aye.
Member Douglas,
Aye.
Member Gottschall,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Snoblin,
Aye.
Member Treffs.
Aye.
Back to me. Okay. Sorry, I was having so much fun looking through my papers. Agenda item number 3, reports and discussions. I do need to advise our viewing audience and task force members as well. We will not be talking about the golf course financials. Agenda item number C. We had some staff availability issues in the last week, and John and Rob and I have not had a chance to sit down and get comfortable. No significant changes in the numbers. We were just modifying them to make them consistent, to have the expense items in past years be the same as expense items in future years, for example. But I just made an executive decision that until the 3 of us have looked at it and are comfortable with it, we will just defer discussion. We will distribute and post on the website later this week. And then it'll be, I promise, number 1 discussion item for next week. So I apologize if someone in the audience has signed in just to listen to that discussion, but I do hope you stick around and listen to the rest.
Steve, I have a question. In our packet, the sheet that comes after the minutes is titled Steps Required to Put Together, Permit, Construct, and Sell Credits from a Mitigation Bank. Is that part of what Mr. Ryan is presenting tonight?
That is Mr. Ryan's presentation.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then after that, just to kind of tee this up. So John will be presenting, what I asked John to do is not to give us pretty pictures, because we've seen pretty pictures, right? We know what a fully mature wetland looks like, and we know what it used to look like before. I want to get a visual of in my head of what it looks like when it's being constructed, right? So John opted, since I didn't want pretty pictures, he opted for no pictures, and we're just going to go. We'll talk about these bullet points as part of the discussion.
Okay.
After our discussion with John, which I said 45 minutes to an hour, although if we are engaged, we will obviously spend as much time as we need. We will then talk about a document that you just received tonight, just to introduce it. And Mark Dewart put this together. It's a prototype of a work plan that we think will be helpful for us and for the board and for the community once it's fully fleshed out in understanding all of the issues that surround wetland and wetland creation. And then after that, we'll talk about a discussion that John and I had with the stormwater management folks, and Noah was with us as well. So with that, let me introduce John Ryan. John is the president of Land and Water Resources.
If I could just say one more item, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
If somebody's already downloaded as far as our guests that are on the meeting tonight, if they've already downloaded the packet, if they could go back to the website and upload, we've put an updated version that has the information that Member Dewart has added. So we just want to make sure you have the updated packet that you're looking at, so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, thank you. So John's family business was construction, earth moving. So he literally got into wetlands from the ground up, from moving dirt. And what I've asked John to do, as I said, is not talk about pretty pictures in the end result, but really get into the down and dirty, step by step. What does it take to make this happen? What does it take to get a wetland up and running? And from that, we will develop this prototype work plan that we've been talking about. John's been involved with wetlands and the wetland environment almost since the Corps of Engineers first promulgated their regulations. In fact, he helped and consulted on some of the regulations as they were being developed. So he's been in this from day one. He's got a world of experience. I asked him not to toot his own horn. I know that's hard, John, but we very much appreciate your spending time with us and look forward to your discussion of what it takes to build a wetland. So John, I'll turn it over to you. And Jeff, are you going to be showing the piece of the presentation, or who's going to do that? John, Jeff?
It's up to you.
Jeff, you can go ahead and pull that up. So it's going to be page 13 of the packet at this point.
Okay, now we'll turn it over to John. It's all yours.
All right, Steve. Well, the actual building of the wetland is the easy part of wetland mitigation banking. And actually, the actual construction of a wetland can be done in one season. The difficult thing, in order to get credits and generate revenue and all that sort of thing, there's a whole lot of other stuff to do. So on this particular project, the Lake Bluff Golf Course, the whole reason you've been thinking about this idea is because of SMC's approaching you on the 40-acre need for flood storage. So you got to figure out how you're going to store floodwaters and to create wetlands. Now you can store some floodwaters in the wetlands. They're designed for that. The question is how deep of water can you put in there and for what duration and still not harm your wetlands. So you also got other competing needs, golf, your public access. I understand you have looked at other potential uses for this site. So kind of what, if one is going to do a wetland or a wetland bank out there, where on the site would it be and how big would it be? To that end, I met John out there on Sunday and we spent a couple hours out there looking around at the site so I could get a better idea of it. There are economics involved. Obviously, the golf course it generates income, you know, that be generating, getting costs covered by SMC, you'd be generating income from a wetland bank, but this is a public facility. So you've got to deal with, you know, what does the community want and does this fit? Once it's decided, if it's decided to do a wetland bank out there, you've got to do some very detailed topographic surveys so one can use that in the design of the wetlands and use that in calculating your flood storage. You also, there are soils maps, which I know SMC provided you. You really need to go out and verify the limits of the hydric soils, because if you're going to go into areas that are not hydric soils, there's more dirt work involved. You need to over excavate those areas, bring hydric soil back in. So that comes into your cost in your design. There was some discussion about perhaps incorporating some stream mitigation credits. So John and I took a look at the stream as it flows through there, and it's not natural at all. It's very straight. It's pretty efficient at moving the water through, but it's one could incorporate a stream mitigation bank into this project. The geomorphology is the study of how streams are supposed to function. It's very expensive and detailed engineering study to tell you how to recreate that stream, put it back into a meandering course, how you armor the sides so you don't have erosion problems and all that. If it's going to be a bank, they require that you look at the soils for contamination, make sure we don't have any of those. I mentioned the excavation design for the wetlands and floodplain already, flood storage. Hydrology design. Kurt Wolford talked a bit, and so did Tom Slansky, about the hydrology needs. In order to have a successful wetland and in order to have get credits released, you have to design it so that you have water from a foot below the surface to probably a foot above the surface for in that range for 28 consecutive days. In looking at that and knowing, I actually built a couple of golf courses in my day, so I understand the drainage that one typically includes in a golf course. So determining why it isn't wetland now, what kind of drainage is out there, is man-made drainage, keeping it dry is very important in dealing with the hydrology. If you are going to be doing flood storage out there and doing all that excavation, I looked at the water features out there to see if we could fill in the ponds that are there and get rid of some of this dirt that you've got to get rid of. But the ponds are very small, they're very shallow, and you're really not going to be able to waste much dirt in there. So rather than hauling dirt off, I think one would have to look at using, if we are going to maintain 9 holes, using the excess dirt to reconfigure and make those better features. I guess I'll work off of my sheet because there's a lot of items down below this. We're in the conceptual design of mitigation bank.
Jen,
yep.
can you pause for just a second? Let's pause after each heading and see if we have
Sure.
questions. I should
Sure.
have said that before. So task force members, any questions or?
I have a quick question. You were, John, you mentioned something. You were starting to talk about the morphology of the stream itself.
Right.
And we understand that many years ago, the great hand came down and appears to have straightened out what was once probably a stream with some wiggle to it. Do you suggest that in as part of this plan that the direction that we put the wiggle back in the stream, though you pointed out that it's likely to be expensive to try to figure out, how that might go?
Well, that stream needs some work. It's not natural at all.
Okay.
Since you're working with the Lake County Stormwater Management Commission and they're interested in getting something more natural out there, along with the flood storage, I think talking to them about whether or not they would do the design for naturalizing that stream, I think it would be a very good thing to do that. Whether or not you decide to go for stream credits. Now, there's wetland credits and there's stream credits. However, if you're going to generate stream credits, you have to incorporate a fairly wide buffer along those streams to generate each credit. You can't double dip. You can't use that acreage for wetlands if you're going to use that as part of the stream credits. So that's all kind of in the conceptual design that I'm talking about. It's not only the design for what would make a good natural system out here, but also looking at that design and looking at what you're doing and saying, am I better off maximizing the stream credits? Am I better off maximizing the wetland credits and having some mix of the two? That comes into the economics end of it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's very obvious that someone with a backhoe was in there and made a very efficient channel to move water through. But like you say, natural streams have got a lot of wiggles. I guess the more technical term is meanders. But
there you
we, Land and Water Resources, designed, built, and constructed the first stream mitigation bank in the state of Illinois. It's out on Rochelle, Flag Rochelle Park District property, out west of the town of Rochelle. It was very successful. We were hoping to get that thing all up and meeting all the success criteria in 5 years. We did it in 2.5. So that was good.
And one last clarification, and I'll defer to somebody else here. Does meandering make the wetland, the adjacent wetland, more efficient?
I'm not sure what you're meaning by the phrase efficient.
Well, I'm going to guess that a straight shot enhances the velocity of at
Oh,
least
yeah.
of the ambient flow of water through there. But
Right.
if I'm trying to, I'll use the wrong word here, direct or spread water into an adjacent wetland area, is that enhanced by making the stream more meandering? And the reason I'm asking is, and you kind of inferred, a straight line stream is going to have this much. If it starts to meander, then it starts to broaden and utilize more adjacent.
Yeah, yes, it does. And it has the ability to store more floodwaters as well.
There you go. That's kind of what I was looking for. Okay.
Which again is part of the complexity of this project, rather than just looking at it as trying to, as I would normally look at a site as a potential wetland bank. I'm trying to maximize the number of wetland credits that I can get there.
Gotcha.
This because of the other factors involved, it would make a much more natural area, perhaps hydrate the wetlands better. It definitely would improve the water quality, the fish habitat, and a lot of the other reasons that they protect streams. But is it the right thing from an ecological standpoint to remeander that stream? Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
Yeah, John George Russell, could you quickly comment on the level of effort that's required to verify the limits of the hydric soils? That sounds like a pretty important determination early in the process, because you had commented that
Well,
beyond the boundary of the hydric soils, you're going to have to excavate out non-hydric soils and then haul in other soils.
Well, it's a matter of hiring a soil scientist. They'll look at the same maps that we do, and they'll go out with dig some test pits and that kind of stuff. It really isn't very time consuming, and it really isn't all that expensive. You're probably talking, on this size of site, less than a week of field work and then writing up a report. But I would look at it as money well spent.
Thank you.
And can this work be done before the golf course is disturbed? Or is this something where we designate the acreage, we maybe go in and tear things up, and then we determine whether the soil is contaminated, whether we can have the proper hydraulic design? How does that
No,
work?
I think that most of this stuff can be done while you probably wouldn't want to do it on the weekend when you have a whole lot of play, but during the week, generally golf courses have a lot less players out there than they do on the weekend. So you're not really tearing up the site by doing any of these studies to any degree. The guy's out there with a shovel digging a little hole and filling it back in after he's looked at the soils in it. That doesn't really disturb play very much, so I think a lot of this work can be done while still having the golf course operational. Yeah.
Thanks.
So if I can ask a quick question to follow up on that. So it's not like you're going out there with a rig and doing coring of soil. This is really more of a more with a shovel in hand.
You're looking at really at the first foot and a half of soils and looking at the nature of those soils. So It's typically done by hand, not, you're not bringing in a drill rig and drilling 20-foot holes or something like that. That's not necessary.
Okay, well, that's good for clarification. Thank you.
And one thing I'm not sure if I have it here, I have it down below. I think I had it on the list I sent you earlier. The other thing is Illinois Historic Preservation requires that you do take a look to see if there's any artifacts out there. That isn't really all that invasive either. Again, they're people out there with shovels and looking around. Typically in the low areas like this, you usually don't find much. If as one of the earlier proposals were to utilize the entire the entire development for wetlands, one would be more likely to find artifacts on the high ground. The Native Americans were pretty smart. They lived and cut their arrowheads and did all that kind of stuff on the high ground. They weren't pitching their tents in the swamps. So that's you generally, like I say, generally find artifacts on the higher ground, not down in the bottoms.
So Jeff, a question that I'm going to ask, unless you address it for each one of these topics, is about how long would survey or engineering take? And since you've spent time on the site, maybe you could make it site specific. You mentioned a week of field work for the hydric soil. Would that be the amount of time? How long would you allow in a project plan to get the surveying and engineering in a report to the client?
Since you already had the H&H study, that normally takes a long time, but apparently you have that in hand already. I didn't download it because frankly, I don't understand it very well. And you gave me, I had plenty of other materials that you guys have given me to look at and understand, but let's see, given that list, it might take you a month and a half to get that stuff done. But that's just getting you the background information. Then you start utilizing all of those factors in actually putting together a design. Now that takes a little bit longer.
Understand that, and that's our next topic here. Is there any, and you don't, I don't want any proprietary information or something you're not comfortable with, but is there a typical cost for a 145-acre site or a 70-acre site to do the engineering that's required to think about a wetland?
I've done over 30 banks, and I could probably go back and take a look at what those are line by line, but I have not prepared. I don't have that stuff at my fingertips.
Okay.
Not that it's necessarily any secret, but
Okay,
I say I'd have to dig to get it. So
yeah, that's fine. We may, well, depending on what we can dig up, we may circle around. Any other questions from the task force on surveying or engineering? Otherwise, let's go to the conceptual design for the mitigation bank.
Okay, well, like I mentioned, there's this site is could be used for both stream credits and wetland credits, and you really got to kind of once you start looking at the topo and assessing that, you need to look at that mix. we started selling credits at the first wetland bank in the Chicago area in '94. And so I've got a number of years of knowing what the prices have been for wetland credits and the absorption rate as to how quickly they move in different areas. Stream mitigation is it's very new in the Chicago area. There's a couple of banks that were recently permitted that have some stream credits. I've heard some cost estimates of what they're getting for that. And I'm experienced in knowing how difficult and how much you got to give up in wetlands in order to get them. So that's something that that whoever you choose as a advisor and mitigation banker and that kind of stuff would have to work with the park district in, hey, you know, I don't know that it would change the design. I think the design should still incorporate, you know, remeandering the stream, but it's just how are you going to slice and dice as far as the credits that come out of it. And I mentioned, you know, since we have a pretty substantial flood storage need to incorporate, with that design, looking at the remeandered stream, looking at how much, you know, how much flood storage can one put in the wetland areas without making it too deep or too long of a duration to be damaging to the wetlands. You've got to also then look at, is there additional flood storage facilities like a big pond or that you have to do in addition to doing the wetlands. And now that if you do, that's going to have an impact on, of course, how many credits you're going to generate, because again, you can't have successful wetlands where you've got deep water for long durations. The plants don't survive. So that's all got to be looked at in that conceptual design stage. And I think that since you have you've got SMC's attention on this thing, and I think they could be very beneficial in looking at that and helping you figure that out. Now, any more questions on the conceptual design, or should I go on into the permitting?
Any questions, people? I guess, John, I have one. And I know this is difficult. It's difficult for us, but it's very hard to get a visual picture of what 40 acre feet of storage looks like.
Okay.
And you've talked about a couple of alternatives. You've talked about spreading the storage over a broad area. You've talked about deep pools. Can you, and if no, that's fine, but can you paint a picture of what a 40 acre storage would look like on this property?
Well, probably the easiest visual of the typical way they do storage in Cook County. I know there's a number of big storage ponds that they MWRD built, and those are not those are designed and functional, but they're not designed to be natural at all. Without a detailed topography map out there, I'd be hard pressed to guess how much we could, if the wetland, say the wetland is going to be, I think some point we put together a map that shows somewhere around 65 or 70 acres worth. It's currently in the floodplain. If you had 100 acres, you'd only have to have it 4/10 of an inch deep. If you've got 40 acres, you could just put a foot over 40 acres. That's 40 acre feet. But when it gets down into the H&H and the hydrology and I got a degree in construction administration, not in hydrology.
Okay.
You know, I'd have to have a discussion with SMC as to how they look at it. And are they looking for 40 acre feet of storage on the site, or 40 acre feet more than what the site incorporates now?
So the proposal is looking, so there's flooding on Route 41, just west of the golf course. There's flooding to the north in the watershed. So what the proposal, as we understand it, is that the stormwater culvert reconstruction will divert stormwater, the same amount of stormwater, into the golf course faster. So it's not an overall increase in volume, it's an increase in velocity.
Right.
My understanding is then it would spread over the wetland area or fill up a detention pond and
Yep.
then either naturally flow through the water into the Skokie River, or maybe even if there's a big, pond, might have to be pumped out if that's the design.
Right.
So all of that's right.
All that's correct.
Okay, so it depends on the design.
Yeah, what does it look like? Don't know yet. We haven't done it. Don't even have the topo. So, but you need engineers to be able to look at that. I suspect what they're talking about is that they're probably looking for 40 acre feet in additional storage, more than what that site already stores during a flood event. But
Yes.
even that, I
Yes.
don't know for sure.
Yes.
When John and I were looking around at the site, I did see, it's obvious, you're gonna be tearing out the greens, the tee boxes and that kind of stuff, and that because those are displacing floodwaters. There's other higher areas in the middle of it that could be cored down, and that creates flood storage. You can, like say, you can't have a half a foot of water or a foot of water over a golf course, because it would immediately kill your turf grass. You can store a half a foot of water, or maybe even a little more, over a wetland without doing any damage, as long as it's, the duration isn't for weeks. So it may be as simple as kind of remeander the stream, kind of level things out, get rid of the drainage, and perhaps put a little bit of a obstruction on the down end stream to hold that flood storage in there during a flood event, and let it go out slowly. But until like I say, until you have a design, I'm kind of guessing. I got pretty good eye for grade, a pretty good understanding of how these construction problems work, but I'm not I've designed a lot of our wetlands, but it's more from the state. Again, I wasn't trying to incorporate additional flood storage, so that's a little over my educational level.
Okay, great.
Steve, I think we have a little bit of information relevant to this in the responses that you have from SMC, which was also included in our packet. For one thing, it does make that point that any existing wetlands would be excluded from the 40 acre feet. So we would have to, those would not be counted, but also they're estimating that there's about 105 acres that may be eligible for wetland. So as John was saying, if you could sort of, cover a very large area with wetland, you would have, you wouldn't have to go very deep. So anything more specific than that, in any case, it sounds like there's plenty of room there to give us what we would need. And I have a question as well. So let's say you just restored the stream and then put in some kind of detention area. We potentially then could get stream credits, but we could not get any credits for the detention area because that's not wetland. Is that right?
Right. Yes, you won't get any credit for the detention area. If an area is designed as detention, it is disqualified from using it as mitigation credits. They are incompatible uses. Now you can store floodwaters in a wetlands. That's a natural function of wetlands, but detention, no, they're two very, they may sound like the same thing, but they're very different.
So is it safe to say then that while we could plan and put in detention areas, we wouldn't get any credit for them? So assuming that we didn't do that, we would not be able to put in more than about 12 inches of water in a particular area without damaging the plant materials. So the minimum, really the minimum almost is a 40 acre footprint, because I can't put more than 12 inches. I couldn't, because of the need to maintain the wetland, I couldn't use 30 acres to store 40 acre feet because I would probably damage.
Your depth would get too deep, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that helps me to understand a bit more of the footprint, because we've talked about, we've talked about small, medium, large, trying to spread it out, and whether you could spread it out to 6 inches per acre, but you can't do much more than 12 inches per acre. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and stepping off the agenda before we get into the regulating and the permitting process, because that's going to be very complex. There was a much discussion earlier where people were wondering whether or not you have wetlands already on the golf course, and I don't know if you can see this, but this was out of your packet that you gave me, and the areas in green on there are wetlands. So you do have existing wetlands on the site. When John and I were driving around out there, I looked to see whether the extent of those wetlands looked to be mapped fairly reasonably, and they look pretty close just by eyeball. So in areas where you've already got existing wetlands, usually you can get credit for enhancing those wetlands, because usually the wetlands that are out there are pretty low quality. In looking at the wetlands that I saw out of the site, some of them are actually pretty decent quality and may not be able to get any credit because they're already good. But that's a fairly low percentage of the overall site. So so just just to make it clear, yeah, you do have some wetlands out there. In fact, we had to stay out of them when we were out there because we were driving around on Sunday. The site was pretty moist. We were the only golf cart allowed on the whole course because we had to walk. It was pretty wet out there.
That's for. Let's
Now-
move to regulatory and permitting.
Okay, well, gee, it looks like, 3 steps in 2 or 3 years. Well, yes, now these terms, prospectus, MBI stands for Mitigation Banking Instrument. The prospectus is not all that complicated of a document. Basically given a thumbnail design of what you're proposing to do out there, how many credits you're proposing to get. But you don't have to have gone through all of the historic preservation, all that other stuff at this point. You do need to have do need to know what your soils are, and you do need to have understand the drainage and the topography, but the rest of it, you can wait until after the prospectus stage and do it during the mitigation banking instrument portion. It's typically about, I don't know, 15 to 20 page document with different maps and discussion of what you're doing. You submit that to, here's another definition, IRT. It's called the Interagency Review Team. It's made up, the core is the lead agency, US EPA and US Fish and Wildlife Service make up the remainder of the IRT. Prospectus is reviewed by the three agencies, and if they say, yeah, this site's got potential, then they put that prospectus out on a 30-day public notice. Then you and the agencies themselves make comments on it. Once you get those comments, you have to address any concerns of the public and any concerns of the agencies. At that point, you start putting together your draft MBI. Now, in the MBI, you're going to have to include all of that other stuff I was talking about. Your H&H stuff, your endangered species stuff, your historic preservation stuff, and all those things I was saying, those have to all be incorporated into the MBI. But at least you'll be at a point where you've got the nod from the agency saying, yeah, this looks pretty good. You then get into the higher levels of your design and tweaking, how much wetlands, how much stream you're going to do. The Corps is going to be very interested in about the fact that you're doing all this flood storage out there. So they're going to have to really get a good understanding on that. They want to make sure that you're not going to be storing 2 or 3 feet of water out there for long duration, because they know that the wetlands aren't going to work. So that's going to have to be all spelled out in the and the only difference between in the draft MBI. Those documents are often 2 or 3 inches thick. You've got a one other thing I forgot up above is a wetland delineation. You've got to hire somebody to go out there and flag and mark the limits of the existing wetlands. And of course, that document's got to be in the MBI. There is and I'd be glad to provide it to the working group, but there is This is the, this is what's required in an MBI. This is, you can find this on the Corps website, the Chicago District's Corps. You look for the 2017 Interagency Coordination Agreement on Mitigation Banking in the Chicago District. They ask for a ton of detail and a ton of analysis, and that all goes in there. Then the agencies kick that around for a while and come up with more questions and more tweaking. I believe the bank that Kathleen O'Connor was talking about, I believe they have been working through the draft MBI process for the last couple of years. Once you've got all that cleaned up, then you can go on to the final MBI. And that's just basically at that point, it's incorporating all the concerns and all the negotiations and everything else that you've gone through with the agencies to say, okay, now we're all in agreement. Let's get something final that everybody will sign. Once you have that final MBI and the bank sponsor signs that, each of the agencies signs that, and then you must post financial assurances that the wetland is actually going to be built and maintained. You have to place the conservation easement on the property so that there's assurance that it will never be used for anything else. And at that point, they allow you to sell a small fraction of the credits you are going to generate. Tom Solwinski talked about those credit releases in his presentation. But once you sell that, your first square foot of mitigation or linear foot of stream, you have 1 year from that point to have it completely built and completely planted and ready to go. So that's, in your case, since the funding is coming from an outside source, coming from SMC, boy, I wish I would have had that opportunity in any of the banking that I was doing, because that came out of my pocket. So that was always something I was very concerned about. But like you say, you guys are in a unique, great position. It's my understanding that SMC that it's offered help in putting together the prospectus and the MBI and holding your hand, through the process. I think that's exceptional opportunity. But just bear in mind, Kurt Wolford and all of his guys are sharp guys, great regulators, but they've certainly reviewed a number of bank proposals, a lot of them mine. But you really should have somebody working with you that makes sure that there aren't traps in there and that it's written to follow the regulations, but at the same time, not obligate you to more than you would otherwise have to do, and not obligate you to, like you say, there can be a lot of traps, and no one would put you in that position intentionally, but sometimes the federal agencies will push and ask for additional things, and one kind of needs to know when to say yes and when to push back on that sort of thing. So that's great. Another.
I have a couple of questions, and I'll open it up to the group. You talked about that that the owner, which in this case would be the park district, must post financial assurance to the Corps to guarantee that the wetland will be built. What, for a nonprofit entity like a park district, what's typical? What will the Corps accept as financial assurance?
They accept bonds, they accept letters of credit, they accept cash escrows. There's a number of different financial vehicles that one can use to post it. I know that Lake County Forest Preserve is working on they're trying to get a couple of banks going, and I don't think they've got into it far enough to discuss that. And I'm sure that the Libertyville Township has got to post financial assurances, and I don't know what vehicle they are using. I just know which vehicles I have used. There's actually something that hasn't been used in the Chicago district, but I know that it's been used other places, and that's to buy an insurance policy, ensuring that the thing's going to get built right.
Okay.
But the level of how much money needs to be secured in that, that how much does that financial assurance need to be for? You need to come up with, once you have your design, once you know what you're all doing out there and what plants you're going to put in, and how much stream work you're going to do, you have to put together a cost estimate for what all that is. And I'd have to take another look at, might be able to find it quickly. It used to be you post financial assurance for 100% of what those dollars that you're expecting to spend out there. I don't know if they're talking about raising.
You don't need to look it up. Well, it's just that we have to think about that question. We also have to think about that the financial responsibility for performance is actually the stormwater management folks. So there's some other issues there. Last quick thing, I just want to make clear. So you're saying this is a 2 to 3 year process for the permitting. So I just want to make sure I'm clear.
If you really push and you're on it, and hounding the agencies and get real good consultants working for you and all that kind of stuff, can be 2 or 3 years. I know of a number of banks that have taken considerably longer than that.
Okay, but I would, however long it takes, the important part I want to make sure we all understand is that you cannot sell credits until your MBI is approved.
Right, and even at that point, and even after you've posted the financial assurances and all that, there is a staged ability in selling credits. And that's all based on how the site's performing.
Yep.
I just opened up to the credit release schedule. 20% when the MBI is signed, adequate financial assurance and site protection. Just like I say, additional 25% once appropriate wetland hydrology has been demonstrated at the bank, meeting the hydrology performance standards, and that they have been met for a period of at least 2 years. So in order to get past the first 15% and get into the next 25%, you are looking at 2 years after the site's been constructed, provided that it's all working right.
Yeah, we've talked about a 10-year process from beginning to end. It's just kind of rule of thumb. Also, just for background for you, we have a team that one of our task force members is leading that is going to be giving us a synopsis of the core regulatory scheme, the 2017 regulatory scheme, as well as the comparative regulatory scheme from SMC. So we're going to have that in 2 weeks. So task force members, something to look forward to. Yep. Other questions from the task force on regulatory or permitting?
I have one for John, and then I'll need to go. I apologize. I need to leave the meeting. John, it sounds to me like, given everything you've described through the MBI process, final MBI process, that the golf course in theory, could remain in operation until that point, that there's nothing.
Absolutely. I mean, the golf course can stay in operation right up until you start moving dirt around.
Okay.
In effect, most sites that I do are vacant farm fields. We always insist that the farmer continue to farm them right up until the point that we say we gotta start building that. Yeah, it would be detrimental to the bank to have the course not be functioning, and here's why. It's because if you stop maintaining things out there, those existing wetlands are going to start to grow and expand. And if you do that, you're going to be losing the opportunity to be creating wetlands because they'll already be there. So, plus I'm sure full disclosure, I'm a golfer, not a particularly good golfer, but I really enjoy the sport. And I imagine there's a lot of people in town that really enjoy the sport and that knowing that if this does go forward, that at least for 2 or 3 years, they are not going to be losing that opportunity, that might be a good thing, for them.
Great comments. Thank you, John.
One quick question here. We talked about, as part of the MBI, the conservation easement has to be at some point, but it sounds like you could go ahead and approve a conservation easement that would not go into effect until you do get to the point in the project where you start to move dirt.
I would advise you to, you will have to put a draft of the conservation easement into the MBI.
Oh, it's just a draft. It's not approved at that point.
Yes, you never sign that thing until your bank is approved because stuff happens. You will have to sign it before you can sell your first credit, but I would never, myself doing my own banks, I would never sign that until I got final approval for a bank, because if for some reason the permitting process went south.
Right. No, I understand. I just want to make sure.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, let's move on to site construction, unless there's another question.
Yeah, one quick note. I thought it was very interesting when the insurance was mentioned. It sort of made me think, at least with, construction, you use title insurance a lot of times for any sort of payout. So I imagine, Julie, that might be a discussion we might have with whatever the agreement might be if we get that far with the stormwater management people, that so we can protect our land in the event something goes wrong. Does that make sense?
Are you asking me that?
Oh, I was asking actually Julie, if you don't mind. Julie, do you have any thoughts about that at all?
I don't, Rob. That's, outside my area of expertise and something that we'd have to get better guidance on.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I mean, that's one thing I love about, like doing title insurance on a construction, is you always know that the trades are getting the money and someone's not walking off with it, so and you get all the ways of protecting the land
Okay.
or any possible liens that might be put on it. So
Right,
I thought that was an interesting thought. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So
I wasn't really talking about title insurance when I mentioned insurance. And I only know of 2 agencies in the country that do this, but they have a insurance vehicle that's used specifically and only for financial assurances on this. If any of you are familiar with landfills, landfills have to put up an insurance guarantee that, you know, once it gets permitted, that they're going to build their landfill. And actually, it's the same kind of policy that they've tweaked to meet the requirements for mitigation banking. So you won't find, you know, your local guy in the insurance guy in the corner likely having any idea about these kind of policies. I say I only know of two in the country. One's up in Wisconsin and the other guy's out on the East Coast. But they're providing these policies for banks all over. Like I say, Chicago district hasn't yet. No one's yet used one on a bank here, to my knowledge. But it is in 2008, the feds put together what's called the mitigation rule. And in there, it does spell out that that is one of the acceptable forms of financial assurance. And so that is an option that can be looked into.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, site construction.
All right, well, you know, we're at the point now where design is all done. You know what you're doing as far as all the grading and what's going to be wetland and stream and all that kind of stuff. But you can, since there is a big flood storage component, there'll be more grading work going on than you know, most mitigation banks. But still, that can easily be accomplished, you know, within a year. And while that's going on, you know, earlier I had said, you know, you've got to look at the site drainage. You've got to get rid of all the drain tiles that are out there, all the culverts that are out there and all that kind of stuff, because those will just tend to bring all the water down into the creek rather than keep it in the wetlands. Erosion control is always, in any project that you do anywhere near a water course in Lake County, erosion control is highly critical. In fact, SMC is the one who makes sure that's done. So I'm sure they'll have that very well designed into the project. But again, the slope protection on the streams, there's a number of different ways to do that. But if one is going to meander the stream like what was discussed, when you get an outside corner and outside of your meander, that's where the water pushes against it, and that'll tend to scour those sides down. And so oftentimes you've got to line those with rock and there's a number of different things that they incorporate, but it's important to make sure that stream keeps its integrity. Now you've got wetland construction, you've got flood storage going on, you've got excess dirt that you're dealing with. So like I say, really expensive to move out. So it's probably, to me, if one was going to not use the whole site and try to keep 9 holes going, to me, that seems like a great opportunity to really make your whatever existing holes and do some really neat stuff with it, with all that dirt. But while that's going on, then you put in whatever paths that you've put into the design. Any of that kind of stuff can all be done. And then during the summer, then likely you'd come in the fall and put in your seeding. The cover crop goes down really immediately after your topsoil is spread. But then you incorporate into that your wetland seeding, some live plugs, and if you're doing in the streams, there's a number of different plantings and stuff that go into the streams at all as well. But all that, like I say, all that can be done in the course of one growing season. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but like I say, the construction part is the easy part. It's all of it's getting it approved is the difficult thing, and one that's hard to put an exact time frame on. I've built enough projects, golf courses, wetlands, and everything else that if I were still a contractor, I could get a job like this done in a year. But so that, and you want to do that, you want to get it done in one season, because now you're disabling all the drainage and that kind of stuff. You'd hate to have to come in and try to finish that dirt work up the next year when everything's soaking wet. So that's just from a coordination standpoint. That's the way you'd have to do it.
Okay, so let's pause there. So it's site construction and then up to cover crop for the site restoration, which I think is a good place to stop. Questions from the task force? So I have one around the plantings. I assume that there are some choices in what the plant base, the plant families that will be part of the wetland. I assume that's part of the design discussion that happens. Yes. Okay.
Your different wetland communities, as I believe Tom talked about, your emergent areas and your sedge meadows and your wet prairies and all these various types of wetlands are all a result of hydrology. How wet of a wetland are you making? A wet prairie, for instance, is on the drier end of wetlands. Typically, wet prairies rarely have any water on the surface. They're saturated down in the top foot of the dirt, but I rarely see water on the top. Yet they're still wetlands. Versus a open water or emergent, those have got water in them all the time, other than a drought. So, and various levels of wetness in between. But again, we're trying to incorporate the flood storage. I know Tom was looking at it, saying he thought that a lot of the soils out there were historically wet prairies and sedge meadows, and I agree with them. But if you're going to have a need to incorporate all that flood storage, I'm thinking that we're probably going to end up with more the emergence, but plants, not cattails, but similar to cattails, plants like bulrush and that sort of thing, that can live with their feet in the water all the time. To me, just my gut feel and looking around and trying to incorporate all of these design criteria, that's probably not what was there historically. But I think if you're going to be, like I say, trying to hold all that flood storage, likely that's what it's going to come out. But then in each of those different plant communities, there are a number of different wetland species that grow well in those hydrologic regimes. So there's a number of native nurseries around where you can buy all those seeds and buy those plugs and that kind of stuff. But as part of your design process and part of your permitting process, you propose a seed mix to the agencies for each of those communities. I don't often get a whole lot of comments on my seed list that we propose, but I always work with consultants that know what they're doing. But I suppose that is something they could comment on. But it's all, like I said, it's all driven by the design of how wet of a wetland in any particular location you're gonna have. That drives the communities, therefore drives the seed mix.
Great.
That make sense?
Yeah, perfect. Question?
I think we could have a wide variety of plants in whatever environment we end up having them. And I think potentially too, as the land rises, we could have different degrees of submersion. So it's not like you're going to have one large area that's all the same kind of plants. I think there could be a lot of variety.
I agree with you on that. What I was trying to say was, because of the need to store all that flood water, I think you'll have much larger emergent component than the soils. It just looking at the soils and try to figure out what was there originally. You've got some Houghton muck out there, and that likely was emergent. You've got some drummer soils, that likely was wet prairies or perhaps sedge meadows. And so, like I say, what Tom was talking about, I think that's what he was looking at. But I tried to think a little bit deeper, and perhaps we're not going to be restoring the same native communities. I think you will, as you go up gradient, you will get a diverse mix of different things. I'm just looking at what's likely to be the major component if you're going to put all that stormwater in there. And that I'm guessing, like I say, don't have a topo. I saw the site for a couple hours, but my guess is from experience that there's likely to be a large merchant component. But yes, you're absolutely right, though. You've got on the very upper end, outside of your limits of your wetlands, you're required to put in 100 foot of upland prairies to buffer the wetland from the golf course. Golf courses in their maintenance, use a fair amount of fertilizer. They use a fair amount of special herbicides, the pesticides, all of that sort of thing. They all get incorporated into managing a golf course correctly. Well, the reason for those upland prairies is as the water flows off the golf course and comes down into the wetlands, those prairies have a good ability to take up a lot of those chemicals, and they're not so damaging to the prairies. In fact, they can be beneficial to the prairies. They can be devastating on some wetland plants, and also on the amphibious life and that sort of thing that just comes on in when you wet a site up like that. Those prairies are designed so as a way of making the two uses out there compatible. Am I clear on that? Does that make sense?
So John, is it fair to say that you're going to need that buffer between the wetland and most any kind of unnatural improvements?
Right.
We've seen we've seen a couple of ideas that have been proposed in the community, like a soccer field or something.
Sure.
So you're still going to need to have
you're required
buffer.
You're required to have a minimum of 100-foot buffer regardless of what's next door, unless it's a native community.
Gotcha.
Many of our mitigation banks have been adjacent to subdivisions, and highways going by and all that kind of stuff, and they've always required at least 100-foot of buffer. And bear in mind, buffers, you get 0.25 credits per acre, not 1 credit per acre. So that does that requirement does release you, does you gotta do it, but you're not getting as much credit for it.
But you do get some credit for that buffer. It's
Typically
not,
0.2, yeah, basically a quarter credit per acre.
okay. So it's not totally useless, if you will. That's a bad word to use, but
No, it's not totally without economic benefit.
that's a much better word for it.
I've been trying to figure out how to maintain being diplomatic, and I'm
Yeah.
so far I think it's working, but
Yeah. No, you did.
it isn't always in my nature, so.
You're well practiced, John.
All right. Not my first rodeo, so.
Let's go from construction to an area that people have had a lot of questions about, and that's the
Sure.
short-term maintenance. So
All right.
if you could talk about what that is, we understand that, you know, there may be climate events that may damage the emerging wetland. How does all that get taken care of?
Well, I hear a lot of people talking about climate change and its effect on the wetlands and all that kind of stuff. And although I'm certain that is a reality, that isn't what I was talking about. What I'm talking about in the short-term maintenance is primarily you've got a fresh piece of dirt out there that you put a bunch of seeding down and a cover crop on, and you're starting to get it wet. What you're doing in that short-term maintenance is primarily weed control. There are species like reed canary grass, or Phragmites, purple loosestrife. There's a whole number of typical invaders that will come in, and while it takes the native species a while to get up and get going, those other ones, reed canary grass especially, is a bear, because if you've got it upstream, it's going to come in with that floodwaters and it's going to spread all over the place. And so, you know, you end up herbiciding that without doing it without trying to keep from killing any of the good stuff that you put in. So it's very specialized maintenance work. It's not, you're not likely to get a guy who's been riding a tractor out there mowing, you know, for the golf course. It probably isn't going to have the right educational background to do maintenance, although mowing is oftentimes mowing is one of the maintenance efforts in early successional wetlands. There's also occasionally you need to do a controlled burn out there. I would definitely suggest not doing it yourself. Hire the professionals who have good insurance, because that can get away from you. But the maintenance is, as I said, the credit generation beyond the second release, which is hydrology. All the rest of the releases are on vegetation, and it's quality vegetation. And if you've got these invaders that are competing with the native species, trying to ever get to those other releases, if you're not staying right on top of the maintenance, is a bear. I'm just trying to think of what other activities: mowing, burning, herbiciding. Oh yeah, one thing I guess maybe should have been even just above the earthwork. Right now, you've got turf grass out there on there. It's likely that the ecologists and such that we work with putting together these bank designs are probably going to call for a herbiciding that turf grass and getting that killed off and disked up and getting rid of so that, that those grasses will be gone, and the remnant grass from the turf grass isn't competing with the wetland plants. So I guess in thinking about this particular, usually I'm not going into turf grass areas, so I didn't think about that when I was putting together the list, but that's something that you have to do. One of the other things that you got to be aware of, and this is something that you're likely to get a lot of attention from residents, especially those who might not be particularly supportive of this, is there are a lot of trees out there in between the fairways. Those are going to have to go. They're not part of a natural wet prairie or emerging community, because most of the trees I saw out there aren't wetland trees. They're upland trees, so they're going to die anyway when you rehydrate the site. But I would think that you would want to make sure people are aware of the fact that you're going to be exchanging those grass fairways and those tree-lined roughs for wetlands and prairies, and that anytime people start taking down trees, it gets people's attention. And but I think it's part of a educational process to your residents as to why that's necessary, and it's and that if but it's a reality. You're gonna have a lot of them are gonna have to go, and if you're gonna do all that grading, most of that grading is going to happen on a little bit higher areas out there, and that's where those trees are. So in order to get that dirt out of there to create the flood storage, even if you were just going to do flood storage and not create a wetlands, those trees would still have to go. But that's part of the site construction. I had put this list together before I went out to the site, and but that is something that I noticed, and I thought it's something you guys should be aware of, because it does.
We appreciate it. That is something I know I hadn't thought about, and we do know that people in this community are very sensitive. They love our trees. We love our trees.
I understand that. So I brought it to your attention.
Yeah. Do you have is there any guidance you can give us in thinking about the cost of short-term maintenance, maybe per acre?
You know, it's every site's a little bit different, but I can go back and take a look at some of the sites that I've done of roughly this size and give you a pretty good estimate. I didn't. I would, again, I wasn't prepared to talk cost.
Okay.
We're just kind of talking about processes. So
Sure. Any other questions on short-term maintenance?
Steve, what period of time are you considering short-term maintenance? Just during the period while the wetland is being established?
Yes, from the point that you get done with your grading up until the point where you have met all your performance criteria. That's your short-term maintenance, and it's intensive maintenance. Once you have met all your vegetative performance criteria out there, then the whole idea behind these wetlands is that they're supposed to be pretty much self-sustaining. The level of maintenance work that's required beyond getting it up and healthy, annual cost is greatly reduced. In fact, some of the banks that we've turned over to some long-term managers, I'm not aware that they're doing much maintenance at all. I do know that in the case of Libertyville Township, I do know that they actually do a fair amount of maintenance on those banks because they want to keep them as good and healthy as they possibly can. There is as part of the requirements in the MBI, part of the permitting process, one of the items that is in there is talking about the long-term maintenance. And as part of that process, one has to come up with a projected tasks that will be needing to be done on the long-term basis after it's established. And then you put a cost on what those items would be. Say a 5-year rotation on burning, say a certain amount of spot herbiciding, whatever tasks they may be. And as part of the permitting, as part of the permit, out of each sale of credits that get sold, a certain amount of dollars per each sale needs to go into what's called a long-term maintenance fund. The idea behind that is so once you've sold out the last of the credits, there's adequate money in that fund in such the interest on that fund is enough to handle your annual projected cost. So it's so that from the park district standpoint, it isn't, the long-term maintenance shouldn't really be any drain on the park district or their revenue, because you've already taken funds out of the proceeds, put them into a dedicated account, and with the concept of the interest on that paying for that long-term maintenance. That cost you some of your proceeds while you're selling it, but it sets you up so that this isn't like a budget item, going into the future that you really should have to worry about.
So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you about short-term. Is there, and I realize it's not fair because you haven't thought about it or prepared for it, but could you at some point give us a sense of what that percentage of proceeds from the sale of a wetland credit, what percent would be a reasonable percentage to put into this long-term maintenance fund?
I, as a banker, would never agree to a percent of the sales.
Okay.
To a certain number of dollars per credit that gets sold, because it really isn't the agency's business to even know what we sell these credits for. Just, how much is available and how much have we sold?
So do you have a sense of how much that dollar value would be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. We're doing a bank currently up in Wadsworth, and we are in the process working with the Lake County Forest Preserve. We're working through a letter of intent for them to take that over as a long-term manager, and so we did put together a cost estimate, and if doing the funding for that, I'm kind of thinking it was, well, since this is recorded, I think I'd rather wait and be factual and actually tell you what it is, because I'd hate to make the wrong guess.
We appreciate that. Anything you could share with us on this, even if there are ranges, would be
It's several of the things that you are asking for are a really public record anyway. If you really wanted to go down and FOIA the core and dig around for it, so I might as well give it to you. I mean, so But those sorts of things are certainly in our permit. That piece that we're working with the Forest Preserve up there is it's roughly twice the size of this. It's 100 and with 2 parcels making up about 135 acres. So I say roughly if this is going to be 70, it's roughly twice the size. But yeah, I can get that stuff.
Okay. Okay, let's move to the last topic then, which is mitigation banking. Jan, if you could put the slide up a little bit, get to the second page. Okay.
Oh, now monitoring. Okay. Before we get to the mitigation banking, you need to have a environmental consultant that monitors the site, and there's several different things that they monitor because you have performance standards. You have a hydrology performance standards, you have vegetative performance standards. So you must monitor both the hydrology and how the plants are doing. The monitoring of the hydrology is done by installing shallow wells that have a instrument on there that reads what the elevation of your groundwater is several times a day and puts it on a little on a chip, and you go out there and download it, and it'll give you a graph as to where your groundwater level is relative to the surface. And as I say, since the standard is that you need to have water within a foot of the surface or higher for 28 days, you got to prove that. On the vegetative end of it, there are several performance standards. You have to have a fairly diverse in each of your wetland communities. Again, emergent, wet prairie, wet meadow, all that. You have to have a minimum number of native species. You've got a very strict very low limit on how much invasive species they have, which they have a huge list of species that they consider invasive. That's why you're doing all the management to control those. You have to, they analyze the vegetation in a lot of different ways and looking at quality, quantity, ground cover, and it's fairly complicated, but they monitor those sites every spring and every fall. And in the in your MBI, you'll spell out monitoring for vegetation is done on transects, which, okay, you got this point here and this point here. They're 100 meters apart. And you draw these lines several places within your wetlands, and you say, this is where we're going to do our transects. Now they go out there with a hoop that is, it's a round hoop, but the inside area is a square meter. They throw that hoop out there and they're counting plants and finding out what all is out there, reporting that. They also do an overall, what they call a time meander search, where they keep walking around until I think they've walked for 5 minutes and haven't found a new species. And so they get a whole list of what's all there. And they look at that. There is a ranking of every plant species out there, and everything out there is between a 1 and a 10 as far as quality. 10 being very rare, very special, 1 being pretty bad. And so you have to have fairly high quality using those species. You have to have good diversity. They look at each plant species has what's called a wetness coefficient. So they're looking to make sure that not only do you have good species, that they're wet species in your wetlands. So all of that stuff is looked at in those monitoring reports. And your releases of credits are based on the data provided to the agencies in those monitoring reports.
Okay, so the environmental consultant is involved as long as there are still credits ready to be sold?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Critical.
got it.
Yep.
Questions? Okay, mitigation banking.
All right, now then we finally get to the fun part. We talked about the permitting, and I put this in here thinking that okay, what if if I were to work out something with the park district in working on a bank project here, what would I think my part would be in this project? So and I suggest, if not me, that you get someone who knows how to handle all this stuff, because I don't know of anybody on your working group or anyone in the park district that has these things. You may surprise me, maybe you do, but oh, my notes disappeared. Can you guys see it?
There we
Oh,
go.
there it is.
John
they-
was playing with you.
All right. See how good my memory is, huh?
Yeah.
But you know, the obvious thing from a mitigation banker standpoint is that it's, you know, getting out there and selling the credits and generating the revenue. But because it takes I've now got 25 years of developing relationships with all the consultants out there and developers out there and that kind of stuff. So I've never really had much of a problem trying to sell credits. I usually have a problem with trying to keep an inventory, but I suggest you get someone on if you're going to do the banking thing early on, because as I said, even if you've got SMC writing up your MBI and writing up your prospectus and doing all that kind of stuff, you really need to have somebody making sure that the vested interest of the park district is being incorporated into those documents and pushing the agencies, because if they don't, the agencies don't get pushed, they're not only permitting mitigation banks, they're permitting wetland impacts, and they're doing all other kind of stuff. So without staying on them and being able to answer their questions, knowing what questions to ask them, that permitting process could go from 2 or 3 years to, gosh, 5 years, 6 years, who knows how long. Your coordination with the park district, you've got park district, obviously owner of the thing, but keeping the park district aware of all the stuff, getting direction from the park district in negotiating with the agencies, and okay, we might have to give this away to get that away, talking about the mix of the credits, doing all that kind of stuff. You really need somebody understanding all of those complexities, and since the park district is the owner here, deal with the park district and say, hey, here's my recommendations, but hey, it's your property, so here's what I suggest. Give me some guidance. You really need to have somebody who knows about constructing the wetlands and the streams to supervise that. You're going to have, you'll have I imagine being a public agency, you're probably gonna have to put it out for bid and use the low bidders and that kind of stuff. It's my experience that oftentimes low bidders might, not a lot of guys who are, got a lot of good experience in doing streams and wetlands or some, but you ought to have somebody making sure that it's done right. We have a bank that we're working with the city of Geneva. They actually permitted and built a bank themselves, and it was looking good for a little bit, and then it dried up, and the Corps suspended their sales. So we came in and worked out a deal with them to fix it and get it back going, and we've been handling that project ever since. So but
So-
that was with low bidders and without somebody really,
Yeah,
overseeing.
without getting into the process the park district will go through, I think what we want to know with mitigation banking is
Yep.
what is the market like? I mean, how much does it vary from season to season? You know, does demand fluctuate? Does price fluctuate? Anything you can help us with that in a couple of minutes would be really helpful.
You know, demand does fluctuate, depending on the economy. The more booming the economy is going, the more subdivisions that are going in, the more activity there is out there being, you know, of wetlands being impacted. Another big driver on that variation, on that demand criteria is, you oftentimes the DOT is a big buyer, can be a big buyer of mitigation credits, but they'll buy a big block and then they won't buy anymore for 5 years or 6 years or something. They buy a big enough inventory that they use it. So gee, the year they're buying could be a banner year, and you could have dry, you know, years with not as much sales other times. So yeah, there is. As far as fluctuation on prices, that's not driven so much by the demand out there as it is the supply out there. You know, right now in the county, there's not very many credits available, but why this is going through the permitting process, I think I mentioned Lake County Forest Reserve is doing a couple of banks, and Kathleen advised you at the Libertyville Township is putting together a bank, and who knows what other ones. The more supply that there is out there, that has a bigger influence on lowering prices than the demand side. And we are in a situation right now that we're aware of a number of different projects, you know, within the Chicago district of where you're going to be up against other banks. So prices, when I sold my first credit back in '94, we sold them for $35,000 a credit. They were the first credits that ever got sold in the country. I've been selling them more recently at $135,000 a credit. I know that Kurt Wolford had talked about a recent sale that he talked about for $150,000 a credit, and that was out of one of my banks. But they're in the older banks prior to the 2017 ICA, there was a concept of uncertified credits and certified credits. Certified credits were what you get once the whole site is met the performance criteria. And in those older banks, we, rather than a person buying 1.5 acres for each acre that they fill in, which is the typical mitigation ratio, certified credits, they buy at a 1-to-1 ratio. That sale out of the, for 150 that Kurt was talking about was out of our bank out in the Fox River portion of Lake County, and those were certified credits. We charge more for them because the developer needs less.
Okay,
The 2017 has eliminated the whole concept of uncertified and certified credit. So that's no long, that's not a factor that you will be dealing with on any mitigation bank going forward.
so it sounds like no one has built an economic model that helps predict both the demand and the supply of credits based on some outside economic factors.
Oh, sure. There are a number of people that do that, and I've done that. But I do it for, and those are definitely not something that I would give anybody else. Those are very much what did you call it?
Proprietary?
Yeah, proprietary. Sorry, I couldn't remember the English word for that. Yeah, proprietary.
Okay.
But just speaking from a general standpoint in looking at what's going on right now and looking at all the stuff that's in the pipeline, and one never knows what the economy is going to do from one year to the next. And I doubt, although I've sold them credits a number of different times, I'd sure be helpful if they would let people know, hey, in a couple of years, I'm going to be needing a bunch of this watershed or that watershed. That's just not how they work. They just decide to put out an RFP when they have the need. And I don't know how much they've got left. So it always makes me happy when that comes out. But there is, just by getting a bank permitted by the Army Corps of Engineers does not qualify it automatically as qualifying it to sell to the DOT. There are additional levels of approval that you go through. Some bankers go through that and are able to sell to the DOT. Others haven't or aren't aware of it, but that's obviously something I do on all of mine, because that can sometimes be a very major source of sales.
Sure. All right, well, we're about 2 hours into our meeting, well over the time that I thought we'd take on this. So I'm gonna ask the task force members if they have any final questions for John.
Yeah, John, this is Al Treffs. When you are looking at a new project for your company, do you put together a team of dedicated people that work only on that project? And if so, how many people are usually on that team?
It doesn't make sense to dedicate people to just that, to any particular project. And here's why, Al, because it's we're talking through the permitting process. Right now,
Especially at the beginning.
there are a lot of starts and stops. You work like heck and you get a bunch of stuff to the agencies, and then you're sitting around for oftentimes a very long time before you get any response from them. Now, once you get a response from them, then you dive back into it, handling whatever questions they have. So to have someone dedicated to just work on not just this project, but any particular project, because the nature of that does not make sense.
Okay, thank you.
Hey,
Um,
John, to that, to add a little more to that, what kind of roles or what kind of team, what are the roles of your team players that you would bring in on a project? What is their skill level? I mean, you have a civil engineer, you have an environmental consultant, you have,
that, you know, there's ecologists, there's soil scientists, there's a whole, I mean, all those different things that you got drain tile expert going out figuring things out. These are I don't a lot of those things are certainly not things that we do in-house, but they are you know, people who, teams of guys who I've worked with on a number of different projects. And so you pull in a lot of people and coordinate a lot of things when you're going through that permitting process. Once that's done, really the having the ecologist on that's doing the maintenance and monitoring is really about the only outside people I use once the permitting process is over, because you know, we handle the sales, we handle the coordination with the agencies, you know, all that other kind of stuff we do in-house. So but yeah, there you can get quite a few people all working simultaneously on those various tasks when you're going through trying to get your permit put together.
okay.
Any other questions? All right. John, thank you very much for spending 2 hours with us. This has been very helpful. I know I learned a lot. I've got about 5 pages of notes here. And we may, if it's okay, come back to you for some clarification or if we have some additional questions on this most fascinating project. But
okay, but if I make another field visit, I might have to bring my sticks with me.
There you go. I bet you we can find a way that you'll get a reduced rate.
There you go.
All right, thank you from me personally, from the Park District, John and staff, the task force, and really the whole community. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it.
I'm sure you're finding out that the whole community that does these sort of things, you know, we all know each other. I mean,
yeah,
you know, Kurt, Tom, and Kathleen, and Chris Burke, and Hay and Associates, and all these are all people who, you know, I deal with all the time. You know, yeah. So yeah, we all know each other, and we all overlap in some areas and count on the other people in other areas. So it all works out, you know.
All righty, thank you much. You're free to stay on, but if you want to get some dinner or go to bed, that's fine as well. Thank you.
I may just mute myself and just listen for a while. So.
Sure, no problem.
Right.
You might be interested in this next piece because what Mark Dewart has done in anticipation of the complexity of dealing with project management. So looking at how to manage this particular project, Mark has put a prototype work plan together, and John or Jeff, if you could roll up the screen so we could get it on the screen, please.
It's virtually impossible to see all at one shot, but you can.
There we go.
Maybe just roll it. Yeah, roll it down a little bit, and we'll just talk about the. I don't think we need to talk about the whole thing, but if you could give me the maybe make sure we've got the header. There you go. That's cool.
There you
go. So when I saw John's list of things, one of the things that I've been trying to get an arm around is really how how do you eat or attack the elephant, the old one bite at a time kind of thing, and understanding what kind of roles and responsibilities we have. And I offered to take a swing at this after I saw it with Steve, and he was very quick to say, yeah, sure, go right ahead. So the gist of it is roles and responsibilities, with, as long as I was detailing it out, trying to put some sort of a timeline, placeholders, some sort of park district impact on the park district budget and whatnot, and whether that's any upfront funding for the park district, or funds that would have to be dispersed from the proceeds, future proceeds of the wetland credits. So, but looking at roles and responsibilities, John helped a lot here, I think. That's one of the reasons that I asked him the last question, which is, what SMC has to do and the park board has to do directly, but beyond that is a group of different hats, whether they're I'm sure there are more. These are the first ones I happen to think about. Things like a project manager, a landscape architect, environmental consulting, the banker, a golf architect, in the event that we're able to maintain a golf presence on the site and what have you. But there are a lot of different hats that people are going to have to wear. My sense is that our friend now, John Ryan, has the ability to manage a number of those hats under his company's umbrella, whether they're in-house capabilities or they're third parties that he retains, and whatnot. At this point tonight, particularly at 8:38, I'm not really asking everybody to chime in and let's go back and erase X's and add X's and things like that. But I would certainly encourage my fellow team members to circle things and do that. And John, I'm more than happy to make sure you get a copy and you can carve on this too. The other piece of this that I sort of jumped past is getting a sense of the timeline. I think that John was helpful in that a good bit, and I'm looking back at all of my notes. Steve and I both have a bunch of notes, I'm guessing too. But for the most part, John Ryan has given us this information in what's essentially a chronological order. I'm going to guess that there are some dependencies and some other things that will cause some of these to end up being started but not stopped, as thinking about mitigation banking and things like that, and certain design criteria may start at the really early but not end until way later on in the process, and whatnot. So I'm not explaining anything to you folks that, if you've done any kind of project management, that it's not obvious to you. But at some point in time, it would be helpful. It would be helpful to me and perhaps to all of us to understand, well, when does this particular line item start in like year one? And it's done typically in year two. John mentioned construction as a 1-year proposition when you get there. The permitting is going to be starting in a year 2 and maybe not getting finished until year 3 or 4 or something like that. That kind of thing. And like I said before, the last piece of this is what's the budgeting for this, and whether it's a retainer to a firm such as Land and Water, or whether it's the park district going out and purchasing things. Whether John mentioned the business of having to have financial assurances and stuff like that, and that's likely to be an instrument that the park district may have to front and manage, or perhaps that's something that SMC is able to support us with. Not sure, but that's really what the particular column under park district funding are a budget. The budget impact for all of these items, or any of these items. I think the good news is that a great many of these are going to be under SMC's budget and opportunity, which is a good deal for us if we elect to proceed in this direction. But again, like I said, there may be some other situations we have here, which either will require the park district to fund up front, or certainly would be earmarks against the proceeds from the wetland credits themselves. And if whether or not we're able to secure present value funding for the future value of the credits and things like that in order to fund any of these kinds of things, or fund any of the other activities that the park district is interested in doing is also an open question as well. So that's kind of it. I don't want to belabor this or take any more time, but I found this to be really helpful for me to get my thoughts organized, and thought perhaps it would be useful for you folks as well.
Yeah, I feel right at home when I look at this. I looked at these things for 40 years. So I think it's a great tool. We'll be fleshing it out. It'll probably get multi-page, I would guess, and may go legal instead of, letter size, but I like it. I think it's something great. Other questions or comments from the task force? So Mark is going to keep working on this, adapt it every time we meet, and at a future meeting, this will actually be the primary principle document that we'll look at when we actually delve into, the nuts and bolts from a planning perspective of the mitigation banking and the creation of wetlands. So,
Steve, I'd ask John Ryan if he feels that this is. Does he find this to be useful for us to use as a construct? And you're muted. There you go, John.
Yeah, I think this is great to start. You kind of took the different tasks and who should be involved, and that's a great start. As far as the timelines start and stop, hopefully I've given you at least a feel for those sorts of things.
Yeah.
No, I haven't really taken the time to study this, but I think it's a good idea to may even have a few more columns, or maybe depending on the different relationships, SMC may handle more of these items and not need some other things, or the banker or whatever, but great start, great way to think about how it all flows.
All right. Well, it's good to know we're off in the right direction, and I do thank you for your comment. And Steve, it's over to you.
Okay, let's if we can roll up through the slides, let's go to a summary, and I'm going to summarize the summary given 8:45 timing of the second set of questions to the Stormwater Management Commission that went out last week, and John and Noah and I met with SMC to go over these, and as he has done in the past, he has answered the questions in writing. I just want to highlight a few of these. We will, this will be part of our, when you get into the actual discussion of, suggestions for the Park District. So question number one, I introduced what I call the concept plan. The concept plan is the document that's floating around the community that shows the pretty walking paths and has the little cutouts of bridges and all of that stuff, right? Everybody's seen that? If you haven't, let John know and he'll send you the deck. But the most aggressive use of golf course property is one that has, in essence, the entire golf course being green. And that plan identified 105 acres of wetland. There was a table, if you remember, on the upper right, identified 105 acres of wetlands. And of those 105 acres, they were estimating 77 credits could be generated. So these questions were thinking about that presentation and trying to fine tune SMC's commitment to build and pay for a wetland environment, wetland and upland prairie environment on that golf course property. So we also need to recognize, as Al has shown on his maps, that the entire golf course property is 145 acres. So we're dealing with 145 acre space. The concept plan that's been floating around has 105 acres with potentially 77 credits. So one of the questions here is, what are we missing if we've got 105 acres as wetlands and 145 acres in the total area? And that's the answer to C here. It's simply saying that the entire 145 acres will not be eligible for wetland credits, as John indicated today in his presentation. The other thing here, SMC had not before this memo committed to actually constructing a wetland on the entire golf course property, which they now in this document have committed to do. So it's not just the area for 40 acre feet of storage. If this is going to be converted all or in part as a wetland, SMC will work with the Park District and will, within reason, pay for the construction of the wetland environment on the area that is agreed upon by the parties. So that's question one. Question two, which is an easier one, it gets to the question of who pays for the walking paths and the bridges and the boardwalks that are part of the concept plan. And as expected, SMC is typically not responsible for those. So in Mark's spreadsheet, so I think there's one that says amenities there, I think, a project. And the big X there is for that would be a Park District responsibility. And that we would need to figure out, Park District would need to figure out a budget and design all those amenities. SMC is attempting to get funding through its grantors for another project, but I'm not going to hold my breath. So I think if we're looking at enhancements or amenities in a wetland environment, the Park District is going to have to think about assuming responsibility for that. The third question, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I make one clarification back
Sure.
up onto number one?
Sure.
The 105 acres is, if you look at the language in that, they're not talking about 105 acres of wetlands, or they're talking about 105 acres of wetlands and upland prairies.
Correct.
It could be 105 acre wetland bank project, but I just wanted to get you to understand that it wouldn't all be wetlands. If it would all been wetlands, it would be a lot more than 77 acres of credit.
Right. Yeah. So I misspoke in my first my first sentence there. It should have said, identified 105 acres of wetland, upland prairie, wetland buffer, et cetera. So yeah, good catch. Number 3 is really to the degree that a golf course will coexist with the stormwater storage and or wetland. I was trying to get an understanding of what the rehabilitation of that golf course will be, specifically the most expensive piece of it, which is an irrigation system. So if one of the golf course fairways needs to be dug up for storage, that will disrupt the irrigation system, which is expensive to put back in. And the answer to question 3 indicates that SMC will restore that Gulf hole to the condition that they found it in, including an irrigation system. They need obviously more details, but that's where we are right now. Question 4 expands the concept of what is quote unquote construction. We're trying to figure out exactly what part of the construction process will SMC pay for. And items A through F in the memo, the answer is yes. Construction costs listed in A through F are eligible grant expenditures. And then the question went on about the wetland environment, and SMC says essentially what John had said, that there is a discussion, negotiation, a lot of planning around the environment, the plants that actually are put in place, and that they would work with the Park District on that particular issue. Number 5 is an important one. So I'm going to read the question and then discuss the answer. So number 5, if the Park District wishes to maximize the area of wetland on the golf course property, 145 acres, will SMC pay for wetland establishment on the entire new wetland area? Now this is wetland, not wetland credits. This is just the environment, a green environment is probably a better way to say it. On the area that is created, or only on the specific areas used for stormwater storage. So the answer, important, SMC will pay for all wetland areas to be constructed on the golf course property, including areas outside of the stormwater storage areas. So that was our assumption. Now we have it in writing that the wetland environment that's created, including the upland prairie, is considered a good solution and paid for by the stormwater management folks. Number 6 is just what will SMC do with respect to the mitigation bank. I don't think we need to go through those. This is just clarifying things that they have said in the past. Number 7 is talking about cost estimates, and it was from a slide in the concept plan. So construction under A, construction fully paid by SMC, that's as defined in question 4, yes. Short-term maintenance, and here in that presentation, this is not our number, it's from the presentation, $500 an acre. I'm not sure, John, if you have any thought as to whether that's appropriate or not, but it's a question of who pays for it. And SMC will pay for it, but within the grant performance period. So their grant and the contract, the IGA, that will be negotiated between SMC and the Park District, if the Park District moves down this path, will have an understanding of the grant period during which SMC would pay for short-term maintenance. Outside of that grant period, it would be the responsibility of the Park District. And then long-term maintenance, which we know is the Park District's responsibility. The SMC answer suggests that $200 an acre is reasonable. So John, do you have any, you don't have to answer this, but do you have any comments on the 500 an acre short-term and 200 an acre long-term?
Yeah, actually on both. I think in 7B where it says $500 per acre, I think should be per acre per year, like he shows in C. I I think that's not an unreasonable estimate. I believe that the long-term maintenance is probably heavier than it needs to be.
Okay. Thank you. Number 8, again, it was a new question. So this is, we know that the H&H study, alternative 3, had 2 stormwater storage locations, 35 acre-feet on the Navy base, 40 acre-feet on the golf course. So this question asks the obvious question, well, can you do some in one and some in the other? And their answer is yes. So that creates another leg of a decision tree, another stem of a decision tree that the Park District will need to consider as they look at options that are available. Do nothing, do part, do enough to fit in an 18-hole golf course, do enough to have a 9-hole course, do it all. So we're going to work through in a couple of weeks all of those and more options that we've talked about. And then number 9 is trying to get at this 2026 date that is in a couple of documents. Their funding, state and federal funding, does have expiration dates attached to it. SMC thought that 2026 was if the Park District is going to do this, that's a number that a date that needs to be kept in mind as the process unfolds. That's it. Any questions on? It was a really good meeting with SMC, really good one. Any questions on that? Okay, great. At this point, I'd like to open it up to our Zoom public and see if there are any questions on what we've talked about tonight. Jeff, nothing? Okay. All right, thank you. Agenda 3D is just a reminder that we've modified our future meeting dates. We're going to go on the every second week schedule. So the next meeting is 2 weeks from today, April 5th, and then April 19th, May 3rd, May 17th, May 31st. And John, I'm not.
Actually,
John,
Steve, we have one question.
Yeah, one question. Okay, good.
Paul Greenfield.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Steve. I just want to make a point. I think Al talked earlier about borrowing money, the Park District borrowing money to pay for some of these upfront costs that might be required of the Park District. And I'd just like to point out, we have legal limitations on what we can borrow. And so that also has to be taken into account. It's not just a question of saying, you know, the board can borrow whatever it will be allowed to borrow from a bank. But there are legal limitations as to what we can borrow. So those, I think, need to be taken into account when you're looking at these calculations.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that. Any other questions?
No, that's everyone.
Okay. So again, next meeting is April 5. John, if there's a way to get this new schedule on the website, just think about how we might do that. Okay. Item 4, task force member reports. Mark, you've given yours. We know what you're going to work on for the next month. Rob is going to be working with Jan and I on the financials, and then Julie, hopefully, will and her team will give us in 2 weeks a regulatory a walk down regulatory lane or something like that. There's 2 scenarios for working with regulators. One that John talked about is with the Corps of Engineers. And there's a 2017 document that describes the regulatory process. And the other is through the Stormwater Management Commission itself. And there's a document that's part of a much broader act that talks about those. So Julie and her team are going to hopefully be able to give us a summarized version of what John talked about at really high level, and we'll dig down another 2 or 3 layers. And we'll talk about, for example, what kind of financial assurance is permitted under the regulatory schemes, what kind of bond is permitted. I just checked, and there is a section, a nice paragraph that talks about those. So that will be one of the items on the agenda in 2 weeks, unless Julie runs into challenges getting that happen. Any other task force members have a report or comment? I will be summarizing our activity and answering questions from the Park District Board on Monday night via Zoom. So if any of the task force members want to participate and help me answer questions or talk about where it is we're halfway through our 4-month study. We thought it was a good time to update the board on just where we are and who we've talked to, and what we're going to do in the next couple of months. So that's on Monday. Nikki, do you have any facts at this point? There are a lot, so if you just want to wait, then we'll read them when you send them out.
Yeah, I have 1 or 2.
Go ahead.
No, I'm not going to go over them now because there are too many, but it sounds like you've taken copious notes. Mark mentioned that he did, perhaps others have too. So what I will do is compile mine and send them to John. And then John, I'd appreciate it if you'd send it out to all the task force members and see if anyone would like to add to it. What I tried to record was answers to questions that people asked, especially Steve. And in addition, just some of the really helpful tips that Mr. Ryan had for us. So that's what I'll be sending, but I welcome other people's additions to it this time. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Emily.
I guess the only thing I would add is that there was discussion about going in person. So I don't know if I thought maybe I should just mention that at our last board meeting or Cal meeting. So just to let you guys know that we might be going to back in person.
Okay, and I'm assuming that would be, so it would be in person. So the Open Meetings Act would apply for the task force members, which means that in order to be considered for a quorum, you would need to be physically present. If you cannot be physically present because of a personal illness, a family illness, business travel, and there might be another exemption, then you could call in by Zoom, but you would not be considered as part of the quorum for establishing the quorum for the meeting. The Zoom would still be available for our audience. So members of the community who want to participate would not need to be there face-to-face, but they could be participating via Zoom. And we'll get to test out your new system, John, and see how that works.
It is on the agenda for the board to discuss at the March 28th meeting.
Okay, so we'll let the board. We'll do whatever the board says, and if they say meet in person, we'll meet in person. There's a lot to be said for the convenience of doing this from your home, right? There's also a lot to be said, especially now that we're getting into the real discussion pieces of this agenda, to be face-to-face and actually, have that discussion real time. So Emily will follow your lead on that. John, any staff report?
No additional information. I just want to thank all the committee members for their amount of time that they're putting in and effort for these meetings. We appreciate all the information.
Okay, any additional business? Other than thanking John again for his, John Ryan for his presentation, appreciate it. We can all wave to John there.
Yeah, thanks for taking us to school.
Yeah. Yeah, what do you think? It was freshman college, and maybe we need to get to, PhD level or grad school at least. So, thank you, John.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to everybody and And I want to thank John for his coming down, meeting with me and navigating that golf cart around so I could see what was going on. It's great to have all the plans and the soils maps and the topo maps and all that kind of stuff, but there's nothing like getting on the ground and seeing things up front, up close and personal. So thanks again, John, for showing me around.
Well, and we've got Al to thank for all the maps. He's the guy that put the map package together that I know you looked at. It's probably frayed on the edges. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mark, with motion, second with Julie. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
I
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 9:06. Thanks, everybody.